The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Gracious God, powerful, loving, redeeming, healing God, God who protects us in the midst of the storm, God who reunites and reconciles, God who helps us to reach out to one another in brotherly, sisterly love, in compassion, in kindness and gentleness, with generosity. Help us as we build a foundation to support the people of Cuba and the Episcopal Church there that has held on through thick and thin. In the most difficult of times, they have been the church in a communist country with a police state and a dictatorship where the people have suffered brutally. Help us to be a beacon of light and hope to these people who are a beacon of light to so many, whose faith often can make ours pale. May we learn from one another and build a bridge between our countries and our cultures and the church there and the church here. In Christ Jesus' name we pray. Amen. As people are getting their coffee and taking a seat, let me just highlight some of the propaganda. I always like to bring propaganda. As some of you know, I'll be leading a pilgrimage to Cuba February 5th through the 12th. Would you just raise your hand if you happen to be planning to go on that pilgrimage? We've got several people here who are going. We have about 20 signed up to go. If you're interested, there's room for about 5 more persons, and feel free to let Anita Burke know if you'd like to join us. The time is right now. The itinerary is found printed in this leaflet. We'll be visiting Matanzas, which is known as the Athens of Cuba because it's produced so many artists and poets and writers. Limonar, a small village where I'm working to raise about $150,000 to rebuild the third oldest church, Episcopal Church in Cuba. We'll be seeing Cienfuegos, Trinidad, the oldest colonial town in Cuba. I'm told it's absolutely magnificent. Cojimar, where Ernest Hemingway based his novel Old Man of the Sea, and Havana. So it should be a magnificent opportunity. There are brochures also for those who are interested about the church that we're working to rebuild. It's a church called San Felipe Diácono. It was started by the first indigenous priest, Episcopal priest of Cuba, who was a former slave, who began this church to minister to former slaves. If you're not aware of this, Cuba was the center of the huge slave trade. The Spaniards controlled the island. They had to replenish 1/10 of all the slaves every year because of death and people just wearing their bodies down, working in the sugar industry, the tobacco industry, and the tea industry. America loved it because the Southerners wanted the slave trade to continue. They wanted to actually annex Cuba. There's a wonderful book. I've got a huge copy. It's at home. It's by Hugh Thomas. He's an Australian historian. I've been trying to work my way through it in Spanish, so I'll go slowly. But you can buy it in English because it was written originally in English. So only a gringo would read it in Spanish. But anyway, it's a wonderful history of Cuba and talks about the slave uprisings and all sorts of different chapters. It's a most interesting country. Entonces, bienvenidos a todos a la lectura de la transformación de Cuba. It's a very complicated and interesting country. I've never been to a country quite like it. It's not an easy country to go and visit on your own, and with the government's situation right now, it'd probably be pretty darn difficult to go visit on your own. But I'll give you one little small, strange example. Carol Shaw, if you were to go and visit Cuba on your own and you had a room at the Hotel Sevilla, which is a great hotel, it's where my daughter and I stayed. If you stay on the 6th floor, where El Capone rented the entire floor with his entourage. I only found that after we were there, and we were on the 6th floor in the room next to the room El stayed in. You would pay a certain amount of money per night to stay in that room. If Joe, your husband, came with you, you'd have to pay twice the price. There's no other country in the world I know like that. Right now, it's a crazy place. But thank you for joining us for this brief presentation about Cuba and transforming Christianity there. a few years ago, I didn't even know there was an Episcopal Church in Cuba. It's a pretty well-kept secret. But it's becoming more and more known right now because at this upcoming General Convention next summer, there will be a resolution passed to reunite with the Episcopal Church in Cuba. When Castro took over in 1959, there was a huge wall of separation, and we could not visit there, could not send money, could not have contact, and they could not have contact with us. So the Episcopal Church in Cuba became completely separated from the Episcopal Church in the United States. If you're not aware of this, we're in 16 different countries. So to say the Episcopal Church in the United States is actually a major offense to Episcopalians in a lot of other countries. But we got cut off completely. And Castro did allow any of the priests who were already ordained to continue to receive a pension and accrue it. But anyone who's ordained after 1959 has no pension. So for us to reunite, the Cuban church is going to have to raise about $1.2 million to pay into the Episcopal Church pension fund. So these priests have worked so hard and for so long will have some pension to retire on. The average, well, all of the Episcopal priests in Cuba earn $55 a month. Now, anyone on our finance committee, please don't get any ideas. Can you imagine trying to survive on that, Scott? This is, I was told they made 40, but that's interesting. It's a low thing. The difference, I'm told, with doctors is if you want a really good medical visit that might help you, you bring along a chicken, or better yet, a sheep or a goat, or if you really want a good diagnosis, bring a cow. Okay. The priests don't get that. That was the good old days in back when the temple was still under operation in Jerusalem, where you'd bring those wonderful things. So the church we're trying to help is San Felipe Diácono, and I'll show some photos of that. It was destroyed in 1987 by a hurricane, just similar to what went through, and Cuba was hit bullseye by this most recent hurricane. And the church in Limonar was completely destroyed. All that's left is a little sacristy where the clergy used to put on their vestments. That's all that they have to worship in. Now, I want to let you know something very special that's going to take place. On Friday night, October 20th, the Bishop of Cuba will be with us. And it's not a he, but a she, Bishop Griselda del Carpio. And she's not Cuban, she's Bolivian. And she's come to be their bishop in Cuba. She's much admired. She's doing a great job, and it's not an easy place to be bishop. I'm not sure there's any place where it's easy to be bishop, but I can assure you in Cuba it's a very big challenge. She's going to be coming for dinner here in this room on Friday, the 20th of October. I hope all of you will come, invite your friends, sign up now because we hope to fill it up and have to cut off the sign up. It's $25 to sign up now, $30 if you try to come at the door and there are any seats left. And if Bishop Griselda del Carpio is not enough for you, Bishop Daniel Gutierrez and his wife will be here from the Diocese of Pennsylvania. And if that's not enough for you, the first Iron Chef, Jose Garces, will be doing the catering. And that's thanks to our new friend Daniel Love, who's doing in-your-service events here at St. Thomas Church. He spread the word to his caterers, and Jose Garces said, I'm in, I want to do that. And so we're excited. You cannot go anywhere in the world and get a Jose Garces meal for $25. There'll be an added charge for the mojitos and the Cuba Libres, but that will keep you from misbehaving. So let me just read some words that came from Bishop Griselda this week. She was without power. Some power came back to Cuba. She wrote, this message came from a phone call with her. We're working not in isolation, but with a group called Ichthus. It's the project. It means fish in Greek. Don't you love that when clergy pick something like that? But anyway, it's really part of a group called the Episcopal Friends of Cuba. They've put this together so they can track every donation going down there. And if you've done any work in the third world, you know that the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing often or getting. And so 7 churches can be contributing to one church, each thinking they're doing everything, not knowing that there's 6 other dance partners on the card. So this is a way of knowing where all the donations are going, making sure all the donations get where they're supposed to get. making sure that all the donations that go do what they're supposed to do. And I think it's a great sense of accountability and support so that we can all work together as a team. We're also working with someone named Marilyn Peterson, who arranges all the flights and does all the international relations for Bishop Griselda. She has, I believe, a PhD in Spanish. She studied for a year in Madrid and has had many different careers, and now has dedicated the final working chapter of her life to working with the Episcopal Church in Cuba. So this is the message that she relays from Bishop Griselda. Some parts of La Habana got electric power back on today, that's Wednesday, but not here at the bishop's house yet. I can't use my computer to send emails or receive emails. At least I have been able to power up my phone to receive your calls. The 3 major tunnels of Havana, these are tunnels just like you would see going into Philadelphia or New York City that go down underground a little bit, are flooded, full of water, making east-west travel in and out of the city very difficult. The east end of Cuba, Santiago and Holguin, which was hit badly by Hurricane Matthew last year, and the far west end of Cuba, Pinar del Rio, were spared the wrath of Irma and are operational in helping the midsection of Cuba. I traveled to Verdadero. This is where my daughter and I began our trip there in March. I traveled to Verdadero yesterday, Geraldo, her husband, to Itabo. Both areas are badly damaged, horrible damage. Even the crops and trees in Itabo have been uprooted and mostly destroyed by the winds of Irma. We made up packets of food goods, sardines, spaghetti, to hand out to the churches where we were able to visit. Small and not enough to solve the huge food scarcity for these days in Cuba, but enough to give hope to the stunned but hardworking people of Cuba. Also, we carried some blankets, sheets, and towels. Please, when you come to Cuba in November, ask your travelers to bring such things as sheets, towels, light blankets, pillowcases, batteries, flashlights. The shake-up powered ones are handy. Candles, shoes, clothes, baby diapers, Depends, canned foods, etc. More list of packable gifts later. I told her that efforts were now afoot to raise funds nationwide by the Community of the Cross of Nails, North America, by St. Thomas Church in Fort Washington, Pennsylvania, and the Cuban Hurricane Relief, coordinated by the Resource Center website and the campaign supplemental to Episcopal Relief and Development. So that gives you just a little sense. Another email that came in said, fortunately, we have had no damage here, but the rest of the island is devastated. Yesterday in Nuevitas and Camagüey, there were many fallen trees, but people are looking to patch up their houses as best they can with whatever the wind did not carry away. In Nuevitas, Irma destroyed many houses, among them the home of my wife Yelene's grandmother. There's little that is left of it, and it must be demolished because of the imminent danger of collapsing. Now I'm seeing what we can do to help them with their repairs. But good and well, I am sure that God will provide. Thanks for your prayers, love and hugs. Elbert. So I got connected to this in part really through the Bible Challenge. Bishop Leo Friday, the former bishop of the Diocese of Southeast Florida, and before that, the Bishop of Honduras. So I've known Leo for like 25 years. We've talked for years about bringing the Bible Challenge to Cuba, and he had to keep waylaying this because he was moving towards retirement. And when he retired, we finally arranged it. And like 2 months before we were to go down there together, the presiding bishop asked him to represent the presiding bishop at the Episcopal Synod of Cuba the week before we were to go, and he couldn't make both trips. So I invited my daughter to join me, and the two of us went down there instead. And we met with the leaders of the Episcopal Church there. We went to the seminary, and we met with the bishop, and it was a great experience. If you ever take one of your children on a place like that, it's a life changer. Now, as I said, that the church there is in really dire shape. They have 49 congregations. Many of them have been destroyed, their buildings, by cyclones and hurricanes. They were not allowed to rebuild during the Castro regime. They now have the green light in some places to do so, but it takes forever to get a permit to get it done. And then you have to wait and wait and wait and wait some more to get steel and concrete blocks and things like that. Last year, they were about to finally build the Camp Blankenship, which was their camp and conference center they've raised money for, and we're hoping to build. All the steel had been ordered, was ready to go. When a hurricane hit the eastern part of the island, all the steel that was to be theirs got moved to rebuild the eastern part of the island. So once again, they can't go forward. That's how life works in Cuba. That's how many third world countries work. 49 congregations served by 23 priests. They go around on bicycles, motorcycles, on buses. They have 6 cars for 49 clergy to get around on the island. That's it. The government will allow them no more. So you can just imagine the challenges of what it's like to lead a church like that. One priest has 6 churches of his own. So it's tightly stretched. They're now trying to find different ways to ordain and train people in seminary. I went to the town of Limonar to see this church that was totally destroyed. The town was founded in 1808. The church was built in 1907. As I said, it's the 3rd oldest Episcopal church in the country. It was a big sugar-producing region, and then the sugar industry went bust. No one had any job whatsoever. And now it's finally making a comeback. So there's hope for the 10,333 residents that live there. After visiting San Diego Felipe in Limonar, they took us to see A Fiel Jesus in Matanzas. This is a dream church. This is kind of what we're trying to build in Limonar. So you'll see photos of that in just a moment. It's really a stunning church, completely rebuilt. It has a beautiful water purification system. 1,800 people in Matanzas come to that church every week to get fresh water. The water in Cuba is hard. It's ruining people's teeth and bodies. So by putting these water softener and water purification systems at a cost of $4,000 per church, it's transforming 1,800 lives every single week. And so the church has not just a religious message, but a great physical message of health. And we're back in the healing business, which is what Jesus got us in 2,000 years ago. Now, one of the neat things about the relationships going on is that there was a seminarian named Frank Cervini back in 1957, was in seminary in the United States, and he wanted to have a mission experience. And when I read about this, I had flashbacks. This is exactly what I did when I was in seminary. I went to Kenya, to this remote area near the border of Uganda, because I heard the church was growing faster in Africa than anywhere else in the world, and I wanted to see it. I was a young seminarian. I thought, I want to see where the church is growing so much, because it's dying in Europe, and I don't want to see it die in the United States. I want to see where it's alive. Well, Frank Cervini, a young seminarian, went to Cuba because he wanted to experience mission work. And he went there, and because he could speak Spanish and was working to learn more Spanish on his own, they put him in a rural parish with a local vicar named Emilio Hernandez. And Emilio Hernandez took him in, and the two of them did ministry together. Because there were no vehicles, they had to ride horses to get everywhere to serve their people. And Emilio Hernandez became a huge advocate of Fidel Castro. Every night between 10 and 11, he'd turn out the lights in his house and we'd listen on the radio to Fidel Castro's speeches. And he became enthralled in this man because he knew of the oppression of the Batista regime in Cuba against the Cuban people. And he viewed Castro literally as the savior of the country. He preached in support of Castro, and the Batista government had soldiers come in the midst of one of the services and drag him out. Well, Frank Cervini was there and everyone else. They dragged Emilio to a cemetery, beat him with gun butts until he was lying half dead and bloody. And Frank Cervini ministered to him and stayed with him, and they healed him till he got back and was able to resume. But he continued to be a supporter of Castro. When Castro took over in the revolution, Emilio Hernandez was given a very high-level position in the government. But he quickly found out that Castro was not who he thought he was, that he was totally enthralled with Marxism, had little interest whatsoever in Christianity. And so Hernandez started to speak out against Castro, and he was put in jail for 8 years and punished cruelly. All those years passed, and Frank Cervini did not see him. Frank went on to become the Bishop of Florida. Emilio Hernandez became the Bishop of Cuba. And they were reconciled and had a chance to meet and reunited. And Frank began a ministry to support the church in Cuba. 30 of the churches in his diocese had partner relationships with the church in Cuba. It's just a sign of kind of the beautiful impact of how things have taken place between our country and our church and the church there. In 1998, John Paul II visited Cuba, and then the Cuban government began to let in groups larger than 12 people to enter Cuba after that. So I'm just going to race forward a little bit and just mention these last things. The Cuban government took over the Episcopal Church and all the schools when it took power. It allowed the churches to continue, but it completely took away the schools. So now the Episcopal Church has to start any schools that they're going to operate. They didn't want Christian schools going on. The first bishop of Cuba was from Minnesota, of all places. Why? Because Edward Kinney of Minnesota was headed to the Dominican Republic to do missionary work when he got shipwrecked in Cuba. And he discovered that there was not a single Protestant church in all of Cuba. So he went back and talked to folks in Minnesota to founding the first Protestant church in Cuba, and it was an Episcopal church. And then they created a diocese, and things took off from there. So it's a interesting, very complicated place. And now I'm just going to show you some slides to give you a little taste of what this looks like. So this is flying in the airplane. This is our first sight of Cuba outside the airplane window. We stayed in Verdadero for a couple days at a resort. But we were out like every day on trips, but it was pretty neat to be there in the morning and around sunset in the evening. This is my daughter Isabel having a café con leche for breakfast. And then I tried to buy any books I could. Literally, I could only find about 20 books for sale, except in this one used bookstore. But all the books are like Fidel Castro's, tyrannical, speeches against the United States. Fidel Castro's thoughts on Marxism and Christianity. Che Guevara's Bolivian journals. Che Guevara's, journals from, I'm trying to think of some of the other places he was over in Africa. Just Che Guevara's romance with his second wife, things like this. Very limited amount of stuff to read. The government controls all the media. You can't get a newspaper, you can't get a radio report or a television broadcast that isn't coming right from the government. They had a dance show. It was for the French guests only at the place, but Isabelle and I walked in and said, "Mais oui, je parle français, je suis très content d'ici avec la grande fête ce soir." Beach shot. This place got hammered by the hurricane. I have no idea whether it really exists right now. Now this is heading over to Matanzas for a day trip to meet at the seminary. We've arrived at the seminary. We're introduced there. They were having their noon worship service. The gentleman in the center is the rector of the seminary. The vice rector, Clara, is on his side, and she is a big champion of rebuilding this church in Limonar. Our presiding bishop, Frank Griswold, is going down to Cuba and spend a month teaching in that seminary. And we're going to try to build up connections there because, for instance, they have a Presbyterian, with all due respect, teaching the Episcopalians liturgy. That's probably not a good thing. Now, I don't know if you can see it down there, but there's a train track, and I'll show a picture of the train on there in just a second. But this is the oldest train line in all of Latin America. Really impressive. It's right out looking down from the seminary. This is the main building at the seminary. This is Isabel and Clara holding up a model made of cardboard, of all things, by Clara's husband, who's the architect who's designed the new church. This is what it looks like close up. How would you like this if you were like having a house built and your architect brought you something made out of cardboard at home? Give you great confidence, I'm sure. Now, the woman on the far side is Marianella, who is the vicar of that little church. The gentleman seated across from her is the chaplain at the seminary. Clara is in the back, and her husband, the architect, is standing in the back. And here we had lunch in the seminary hall with students all gathered around us. This is their library. It's actually a whole lot better than the library at the little Bible school in Maseno in Kenya where I was for a summer. But like most libraries, most of the books are like in English. They're books that Liz and I would be trying to get rid of from our shelves. And if you have one book that would be valuable, like I have this little book in Spanish on Anglicanism by a famous English bishop named Stephen Neal. I've got 2 copies of it. I'm going to try to get more to bring down there. They have 1 copy in the whole seminary. So if they assign this, they have to have 15 or 20 students pass it around to read it. So we're going to try to help them get better resources. This is one of their seminary classes. And it's a mixed seminary. You have, in this class, you'll have Quakers, Presbyterians, Episcopalians, Lutherans. They were Methodists, but the Methodists down there are super Pentecostal. Never heard of such a thing. And they decided to break away and create their own seminary. This is, you can stay there and you can bring groups to stay there in their lodging. It wasn't really something that looked too inviting, I'll be honest. But, and then this is outdoors of the chapel on the grounds. This is a view looking over St. Paul's Roman Catholic Cathedral in Matanzas from the seminary. And that's that train I told you about on the oldest train line in all of Latin America. This is the downtown plaza in Matanzas, the Athens of Cuba. They actually have a stunning opera and theater house there that was closed for renovations, but it looks really spectacular. There's some great arts in Matanzas, just the local building there. Now, these are 4 of the women who are the pillars of the church in Limonar at San Diacono Felipe. These are people who have lived through the worst hours of Cuba, and they have stayed with the Christian faith with very, very, very little support from the outside. This is a picture of them. It's a picture that I took a picture of, so that's why you've got the flash. Unfortunately, Bishop Griselda's in the center, but this is when she came to visit their congregation. Marianella's on the far side of this photograph, the local vicar of the church. And this is inside that little sacristy, all that's left of the church. Do you know where the clergy vest at St. Thomas? That's like all that would be left for them, and that's where they have to gather to worship. This shows you kind of the decay that bugs do eating into the wood and that other rot does that on the wall that remains in that one little building. And this is a street in Limonar right outside the church. Local gentleman going by, in a horse-drawn carriage or cart. And they're starting to rebuild the church, making modest steps forward. Everyone's pitching in to help. By the way, we could send mission teams down there, but we have to be very careful. We're not allowed to do any work that you'd have to pay a Cuban to do. So we may have to do things like have a vacation Bible school because we can't do something that they'd have to pay a Cuban to do because we'll be taking away their work. So we'll have to be very careful about how we go about this. The bishop can arrange all of that. And this is the license for construction, which took them about 4 decades or 5 decades to get. This is Isabel outside that little sacristy. Now we're heading off back to Matanzas, but we pass this sign that says Al Esclavo Rebelde, and that is a place where they had a slave uprising years ago. And I'm hoping when we go back as a group, we'll be able to stop and see that area where the slaves rose up and where many of them were killed. This is the sign as we enter Matanzas. It's known as the City of Bridges because there are all these bridges across the bodies of water there. And this, you know what this is? What? This is a internet cafe, my friends. They allow them to get internet there. So people go there and they can get connectivity. Isn't that amazing? You can get some Wi-Fi in Cuba in the hotels. You have to pay for it. It's like a couple dollars for every, 15 or 30 minutes. It used to be like $5 per minute. It's unbelievable. And then it breaks down. So like my nephew of all things was coming over there with a friend to visit Cuba while we were there. We tried to email him. We had to switch locations to go out for dinner. He never got the email. We never connected. Now this is the outside. It's a very nondescript outside of Afiel Jesus, the oldest church in all Episcopal Church in Cuba. And this is how they rebuilt it. I mean, it's really stunning. And this is a courtyard outside And the people come into this courtyard to get their water every day. And this is the vicar. And her little daughter is hugging her leg, just like any of our daughters would hug their mother. This is the water purification system. It's $4,000 or $5,000 in cost. They want to put these in 20 more churches because it's a gift to the whole community. Things we take for granted. Clean, healthy water. Now this is the kitchen. I swear it looked like a little Italian restaurant. I was amazed. And this is a place where we can bring a mission team and stay and feel very clean, safe, and healthy. This was all built by a church in North Carolina that's been partnering with Afiel Jesus. And they've done an incredible job of giving hope to these people. And this is the area we can stay. It's all new. It's all clean. It's a really great place, to bring a mission group or a pilgrimage group. These are our folks there. The woman on the far side is the historian of the Episcopal Church of Cuba with her husband, who is our driver for the day. Marianella is right next to Isabel, and Clara and her husband are right in the center. That shows you they have some good infrastructure in some places, this huge span bridge. Now this is where in Whitemarsh now. Whitemarsh is a little kind of suburb of Havana, and this is where the village where Hemingway situated his novel Old Man of the Sea. Now Bob Peck is going to be speaking here in a couple weeks. You have to come hear Bob. He's one of the best speakers, I think, in the country. Bob is a distinguished senior fellow at the Academy of Science. We have him coming in a most interesting topic. It's not really religious, but it's just worth it. He's been to Mongolia, to very remote regions there 8 times to chronicle the changes in the folk culture because of the massive changes going on with globalization. And they're looking at this culture disappearing from the face of the earth. And so Bob was sent by the Academy of Science to go to Cuba on the celebration of the 50th anniversary of Ernest Hemingway receiving the Nobel Prize for Literature. So Bob has a beard. Bob looks a lot like Ernest Hemingway. And the people of Whitemarsh heard that 2 of Hemingway's grandsons were on this little skiff or boat coming to the shore to go to La Finca Vieja, Hemingway's house, and to meet with the delegation for this great big celebration of the 50th anniversary. They see Bob Peck, and they say, Hemingway, Hemingway, Hemingway. And Bob has to say, it's in the back of the boat. And with that, they totally ignored him the rest of the trip. This is it shows you the kind of mansions and houses that are now really in ruins. You could just imagine Hemingway's boat, the Pilar, pulling up right here. By the way, if you're not aware of this, during World War II, Hemingway was like a zealot for war. I mean, when he was a journalist, he actually got involved in some combat, which journalists aren't supposed to do. He had weapons hidden up in his hotel room and all sorts of stuff. But he took Pilar, this old wooden boat, which you'll see pictures of in a minute, and he went out around Cuba in the waters trying to track down German submarines because the German submarines were down there right off the coast of America. Cuba is 90 miles off of Miami. And the Germans would land and sometimes come into Havana to socialize. And so he went out on his boat trying to track them down. But you can imagine the Pilar pulling right into this little dock area. Here's a man cleaning fish. I have a weakness, and I love going to like old bars like this. This is where Hemingway used to hang out in Whitemarsh. And Castro and Hemingway in a photo. And this is, I don't know if you can see very well, this is a mammoth shark. And like the whole village is sitting on this shark. It's like a whale. And here we are with our driver, Miguel, or Miguelito, and we're having lunch in this restaurant. Miguel would never have come in, but I said, no, you have to come in and eat with us. And here, I have another weakness. I love flan. This is like the best flan I've ever had. And here's the chair where Ernest Hemingway used to sit at the table, and there's a little bust of him behind it. The Cuban people claim Hemingway as their own. He also spied for the CIA during his time down there. There's a new book that's come out there. And this is in Whitemarsh, the fortress there. And this is a wonderful gentleman just playing the guitar. There's some people in Whitemarsh still alive who used to fish with Hemingway. This is a statue of Hemingway here. Kind of looks like a dog, doesn't it? Looks like my corgi seated. And here we're moving into Havana. Some of the architecture is just phenomenally beautiful there. I believe this is the Park Central Hotel. And this is, we stayed in the Hotel Sevilla. This is our room. It was enough to sleep probably, 6 people easily. And this is Big Al Capone, who rented the room next to us, if only we knew. And they would have these great singers every night just down in this kind of bar area, and the music in Cuba is extraordinary. Here we are meeting with Bishop Griselda in the center, and her head of ministry next to her, holding up Bible Challenge packets, which I brought down. So they're doing the Bible Challenge down there. And here's their center where groups can stay and where they do outreach from the center. This is Isabel in the Palador San Cristal. Cristal or Cristobal? I think it's Cristobal. This is where Barack Obama and his family had dinner. And when they went down to Cuba and to open up relations with Cuba to a new level. It took like an hour wait to get in there. It was kind of, or longer, but it was nice to be able to eat there. The food in Cuba is really not that extraordinary. That's not what you really go for. This is the room where the Obama family had dinner. And then, if you're not aware, their capital was designed exactly after ours. Those old cars are around everywhere. This is La Floridita, which is where they invented the daiquiri, and it was Hemingway's favorite place for the daiquiri. I have a real fondness for parts of Hemingway's life, not all parts, but he had this famous expression. His favorite place for mojitos was La Bodega de Media. So he said, La Florita por mi daiquiri, La Bodega de Media por mi mojito. And it's become this kind of phrase throughout all of Havana. So this is inside. The music was just jamming. There were not many gringos in there. This is like an all-Cuban group, and it was a blast. And here I am with a bust. There is a bust of him everywhere. This is an old chemist shop in Havana. And a funny thing happened to me on the way down the street. I stepped in a hole, that went down a foot, right in the middle of the cement walk. My daughter laughed her head off. They put a piece of cardboard over it. But I got my leg gouged. I wasn't so happy. And I just thought, the infrastructure is not so hot. Another old, wonderful building you can just tour into. Now, this is the hotel room, because I am a real pilgrim for Hemingway, too. We found the room where he wrote his novels. He would spend part of every year for a decade down in Havana before he bought his house. And he rent the same room. He has his fishing rods in back, his typewriter right there. This is where he wrote a number of his major novels. And that's the typewriter he used. A walking tour of Havana here. A lot of really ancient buildings, the old fortress, moat. It is really a cool city to walk around. This is obviously very Spanish architecture. The cathedral. This woman is smoking a cigar, yes, and she's playing with tarot cards. And Santeria is their religion there, which is the biggest religion. It's a mixture of Christianity and kind of like African religion. And you can walk through these streets. They're safe. They're interesting. They're intriguing. It's graffiti. There's nothing to buy except some art. That's about the only thing, and rum and cigars are about the only 3 things you want to bring back. Now, these are some military weapons up near Che Guevara's house. An old frigate coming into the harbor. You see these huge cruise ships that can come into port now. Now, this is the house of Che. Everything around the country's got reminders of Che. It's like George Washington. Che's portrait, Che's bed, Che's typewriter, his coffee cup, camera, VCR, the Holy Grail. This is where his cremains were brought back from Bolivia. He went to launch revolutions in other parts of the country. Not a really helpful thing. This is the major fortress in Cuba. Now, this is where Fidel would hold all the national meetings and where people would come out for on this huge esplanade and gather in front of this for these huge rallies, kind of Soviet style. This is La Bodega de Media, a great place for mojitos. just filled with graffiti. And this is where they're practicing. Our guide took us out to this national park area, or it'd be like going to Militia Hill up to the area there. And so they're practicing a Santeria ritual. I don't know if you can see, but the gentleman leaning down, he's got some chickens, and he had 2 chickens. And our guide told us this may be disturbing you, because what they did is they basically drown the chickens, and they ring these little bells, and they do incantations. And then my camera lost all of its storage just at the moment when they took these wet dying chickens and ran them up and down the body of this person for this ceremony. But it was really kind of wild. But talk about a different religion. And there are 2 great art museums in Havana. There's the El Museo de Bellas Artes, and then there's the El Museo de Bellas Artes Cubano. And the Museo de Bellas Artes Cubano, the Cuban Art Museum, has got incredible art. The international one is really what I call second or third rate art. But the art of the Cubans itself was magnificent. And there we met Mims and Emily, my stepdaughter, who were in Cuba at the same time on a Vanderbilt trip. We ran into them in the museum. It was great. Family reunion. This is the palace at the former palace where the dictator Batista had his palace. They've now turned it into a museum of the revolution. Kind of ironic, and it has planes that were used in the revolution, tanks, all sorts of things. And there are posters and displays all about what the CIA did to people, nothing about what Castro did to anyone. But you get a very one-sided view. We probably did some pretty gruesome, bad things, but nothing that Castro did is lifted up. But if you can imagine decades of just seeing that stuff only one side, it gives people just a very slanted view of things. This is the main street through Havana, or the main walkway. This is very similar to Las Ramblas in Barcelona, where the driver recently killed so many people. Very similar kind of walkway. Beautiful architecture. We had a wonderful outdoor dinner one night. We had drinks right in front of this beautiful church. This is their concert hall, and we went to see a ballet based on the poetry of Federico Garcia Lorca, the great Spanish poet. This is a bar called Sloppy Joe's, where Hemingway hung out, but a lot of the mafia as well. And it looks like they just left. You see posters of all the old kind of gangsters and Ernest himself. Very famous bar. This is La Finca Vieja, Hemingway's house. You cannot enter it, but you can take pictures through the windows. Everything was left exactly as Hemingway left it. Absolutely. All the animal heads mounted, the books in place. This is the tower that his wife, I think it was his third wife, had built for him, where he could go up and write his novels in and short stories. His wardrobe is left hanging in the boots just as he left them. His writing desk, can peer into his bathroom. This is the pool where one of the famous American actresses, I think it was Greta Garbo, came to visit and swam naked in the pool. And this is Pilar, his famous boat that he took out fishing, but also went chasing German submarines. Pictures of him with actresses and his wife, and the old cars are everywhere. Great little band singing Guantanamera. This is in La Playa, and there's Country Club in Miramar. These are 3 major suburbs outside of Havana, and they are very nice. And what's happened is the Cuban government and military basically has the houses that the capitalists used to have. Not much has really changed. Most of the people are like peasants, and then you have this upper echelon in the Communist Party. And this is a famous artist, and his name just shot out of my brain, but he's known as the Gaudi of Cuba. And it's like, does anyone remember the name? It's like Fulgar or something. But he has done all this tile work in this one area of suburban area, and it's really spectacular and interesting. But having seen Gaudi's work, it's not nearly of that level, but it's really quite fascinating. And this is some of the art that was available. I wish I had actually purchased some. I thought this was very fascinating. This is the Museum of Antiquities there. Or excuse me, this is the Museum of Bellas Artes, but the international one. They have an incredible collection of antiquities. Who would have thought in Havana? Greek and Roman ruins. And then down below you see painters. This is Joaquin Sorolla, who's one of my favorite Spanish painters. I don't know if anyone knows Margie Rook. Margie first told me about Joaquin Sorolla. She fell in love with his artwork while she was there as a student abroad. And then when her son went abroad in Spain, she told him about his art. And she didn't actually. He found out about it on his own, came back and told his mother, I fell in love with this artist in Spain. She said, what's his name? He said, Joaquin Sorolla. She said, same thing happened to me, 30 years ago. More Sorolla. Isabel and I had a wonderful outdoor dinner that night in front of the church. And this is the Malecon. Water comes right over there at times. You can only imagine what happened in Hurricane Irma. This is the American Embassy. And you can imagine how popular that place was for Fidel. So he had 150 flagpoles, because up on top of that embassy, there's a scrolling message downtown in Philadelphia. And the scrolling message was said, the Cuban government is starving its people. Then we go around. So they put 150 flag posts in front to block it. And then this metal rings, this is like this outdoor amphitheater. Fidel, every Friday for like 3 decades, would give a 4-hour speech there, and thousands of people would hang out and listen. 4 hours of some kind of dictator's diatribe. Unbelievable. This is worship in the cathedral in Havana. And this is the Hotel Nacional, where Frank Sinatra sang, where a lot of the mafia hung out, and still an interesting place to have a meal. And this is you take these old cars, it's like twice as much as a taxi, and drive around, and it is really an experience. And this shows you there are a lot of parts of Havana that look like Beirut, virtually bombed out. This is one of the most famous restaurants. There's a movie called Raspberries and Chocolate. This is where the film was shot. It's a very famous movie. It's about, I think, 2 guys, 2 young men, one who's gay, one who's not, and their relationship, and they have a dinner at this restaurant. It looks like you're going, just to a bombed out building. This is the downstairs. This is Isabel waiting to go up. We thought the taxi dropped us off. We're like, are you kidding me? And then you go up, 2nd floor, they have the laundry hanging out. Like, for real? And then you get up and you have this really nice restaurant area. And this was actually the best food we had in all of Cuba. And then coming back, it looks like Beirut. Just the buildings are in decay. And that's Miguelito, our driver, with Isabel. And now we're flying home. So that's it, my friends. Any questions or things you want to ask about? I'm no authority on this stuff. Any questions come to mind? Yes, Scott. You can, I don't know that, to be honest, but you can sign up now if you want. Yeah, okay. Be in touch with Anita. She can help you with that. I'm flying to Spain tonight to meet with the Bishop of Spain there for a couple days, but she can help you with those questions. Yeah. Other questions? Thoughts? Then have a great day, folks. Thank you for your attention. Good to see you. God bless you. We'll see those of you who are coming to Cuba with us. It'll be fun.